Have you ever noticed that when your team wins, it feels like you've won too? Well, the Knicks beat the Spurs in the NBA Finals, and suddenly New York feels electric. Complete strangers hugging in bars, people high-fiving on the sidewalks. Social media explodes. For a moment in time, thousands, sometimes millions of people are experiencing the exact same surge of emotions at the exact same time. Well, if you know me as a Buffalo Sabres native and a Hurricanes fan in North Carolina, I was actually more absorbed in the Stanley Cup Finals this year, which they won, by the way. But the same phenomenon shows up here too. It shows up everywhere in sports, whether it's basketball, hockey, football, soccer, UFC. Something fascinating happens inside the human brain when we become part of a tribe. And from a neuroscience perspective, that's actually a very good thing. This video is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. If you're ready to quit porn and reclaim your life mentally and physically, go over to drtrishleigh.com/book. Humans evolved in groups, around campfires and shared stories, around victories and losses that were experienced together. We were never designed to do life alone. Today's sports often provide one of the few remaining places where people still experience that sense of collective belonging. Sociologists call it collective effervescence, the experience of becoming emotionally synchronized with a group. Everyone is feeling the same thing at the same time. Your brain responds powerfully to that experience. There's anticipation, there's belonging and collective identity. There's meaning that's created. And in a world where loneliness continues to rise and many people know more about strangers online than they know about their own neighbors, sports can provide something surprisingly valuable: connection. It reminds us that we're part of something bigger than just ourselves. One of my clients showed me this in a way that I'll never forget. Let's call him Pete. Pete was tracking his brain performance throughout his program with me. We were monitoring stress levels, attention regulation, and overall brain function over time. Most weeks his data followed a fairly predictable pattern. But then on one Sunday in late fall, his stress score suddenly doubled. Not increased, doubled. When I looked at the data, it jumped off the page. Something significant had happened. At our next session, I asked him, "What's going on, Pete?" He laughed and said, "Dr. Trish, it was a football game." At first, we both were kind of complexed, and I thought he was joking because that's a double in stress activation, but he wasn't. And as we talked about it, he started describing what happened during the game. Every play felt incredibly important. Every mistake felt personal. Every referee call triggered an emotional reaction. His heart rate increased. His muscles tightened. His thoughts became completely locked on to the outcome. Then he said something truly fascinating. He said, "I can actually feel it now. I can feel my brain getting pulled into it." And that was the moment that everything clicked for him. The issue wasn't football. The issue was what football had become inside his brain and nervous system. The game was no longer simply entertainment. His brain had started to treat the outcomes in the game and the overall outcome as if it carried much more significance than it actually did to his life. He wasn't consciously choosing this response. His nervous system had learned it. And what made the story so powerful was that I could see this data happening in his brain as he felt it happening in real time. That's one of the things I love most about neuroscience and neuromodulation technology. Sometimes people think something is happening only in their imagination or in their mind. And then we look at the data and they discover that their brain has been telling them the same story all along. Okay, so before anyone misunderstands me, I love sports. Go Bills. I understand the excitement, and I totally understand the tribal pull. It feels so good. I understand what it feels like when your team wins the championship. Sports can be one of the healthiest forms of community that we have. But Pete's story illustrates something that I talk about all the time: the difference between healthy engagement and what I call a dopamine hijack. Because if you've followed my work for any amount of time, you've heard me say that dopamine isn't about pleasure. Dopamine is about pursuit. It's the signal that tells your brain, pay attention, this matters. It's what motivates you to chase goals and to build businesses and to raise your family, to train for competitions, and to create a meaningful future for yourself. Dopamine itself isn't the problem. In fact, it's totally essential to all of those things. But the challenge is that modern culture has become incredibly effective at capturing our attention and directing our reward systems toward things that don't always serve us. In today's day and age, the reward system is constantly being pulled toward stimulation, hyperstimulation, scrolling, gaming, online drama, sports betting, pornography, endless content, highly stimulating. None of these activities are automatically harmful, besides pornography, if you've been here with me. But the more important question is whether your brain is using them intentionally or whether they have started using you. That's the distinction. Because when something repeatedly captures the reward system, your brain learns to return to it more automatically and more frequently over time. So that's where sports fandom can sometimes cross a line. Not for everyone, even though there were times I took my Bills earrings off because I was superstitious. Not even for most people, but for some people the game stops being something that they enjoy and it starts becoming something they need. A loss affects their mood for days. Their emotional state becomes tied to the scoreboard. Hours disappear consuming analyses, predictions, commentary, arguments, podcasts, highlights, and statistics. The brain begins anticipating the next emotional payoff. Not because the person lacks discipline, not because they're weak, because reward systems learn through repetition. Whatever the brain repeatedly turns toward becomes easier to access and more familiar over time. This can become a miswire for many people in their brain. So for some people, fandom evolves into something entirely different. For many people, then it can evolve through stimulation into sports betting. And this is where the neuroscience becomes especially interesting because now uncertainty gets mixed with money. So every play carries a potential financial reward. Every near miss creates anticipation at higher levels. Every loss creates the urge to recover. The brain becomes focused on possibility. And neuroscience has consistently shown that unpredictable rewards produce some of the strongest dopamine responses in the human brain. It's the same principle that makes slot machines so effective. The reward is not guaranteed. In fact, the uncertainty itself becomes part of what captures your attention. Your brain keeps learning and leaning into it, leaning forward, because the next outcome might be different. It might be better. At that point, a person is no longer simply watching the game. They're emotionally attached to the result, financially attached to the result. And when enough emotional energy gets attached to outcomes outside of your control, strange things can start happening. Fans riot, people fight over rival teams, friendships become strained, entire cities ride emotional waves based on what happened in a stadium hundreds of miles away. Which raises an interesting question. How does something that creates connection also create such high levels of division? The answer is that dopamine itself isn't good or bad. It's powerful. And powerful tools, they depend on how they are used. What I love about Pete's story is that he never stopped watching football. He still loves it. That is not what happened. He didn't swear off sports forever. He didn't decide that football was unhealthy for him. He still cares about his team. But what changed was the relationship between his brain and the game. Before, every single outcome felt personal. Afterward, it felt recreational. It was fun again. He still enjoyed the games, he still looked forward to them, and he felt connected to the other fans and the team itself, but the emotional intensity started coming down. It cooled off a bit. His team could lose and he was still okay. No double stress activation spikes. His team could win and it was exciting, but it wasn't life-altering. The game returned to its proper place in his life. Entertainment, community, shared experience, not survival. And I think that this is such an important distinction because it's exactly how reward dysregulation or dysfunction works. The problem is rarely the activity itself. The problem is what the activity has become inside the person's brain. So of course, sports and enjoying sports can be healthy. Gaming can be healthy. Social media can be healthy. Most times it's not. Pornography, I'm sorry to tell you, it cannot be healthy. It's at the highest of the supernormal stimuli. But the more important question of all of these things is whether your brain has become dependent on that activity to regulate how you feel. That's the miswiring. When that happens, the activity starts carrying emotional weight it was never supposed to carry. That's when you find yourself checking scores during dinner, refreshing updates at work, feeling emotionally drained by events that have no direct impact on your actual life. So from a neuroscience perspective, that's information. It's not judgment, information. It tells you where your reward system may be asking for more stimulation than it used to. And that's the exact same process that I see across many different behaviors, different activities. It's all the same circuitry in the brain. The brain learns where to look for the easy reward, and eventually it starts returning there automatically. That's why my entire framework revolves around 4 stages. The dopamine hijack associated with whatever you're consuming, the miswiring that makes you need to go back there for high levels of dopamine, then of course the rewire, and then the hardwire. So this is what happens. First, your brain becomes hijacked by the source of stimulation. Then it becomes miswired as repeated exposures strengthen those pathways. But the good news is that neuroplasticity allows the desire to rewire in your brain. And eventually those healthier patterns become automatic again. Your brain can hardwire in for the life that you actually want, not be hardwired for constant stimulation or for endless consumption, but instead hardwired for purpose, connection, presence, meaning, the things that make your life feel full and fulfilling again. That's exactly why I use brain mapping and what's called neuromodulation technology, brain-altering technology. Brain mapping allows us to see what's actually happening inside your brain. Is your attention dysregulated? Are your anxiety levels elevated? Is the reward system constantly searching for high levels of stimulation? Perhaps your brain's spending too much time in high beta stress activation. Once we can see the pattern clearly, then you can stop guessing. And when you stop guessing, that is when you can begin changing it. That's exactly what Pete and I did. He didn't lose his passion, he actually regained his perspective. And that's exactly how I defined a hardwired brain. It's not a brain that avoids excitement or one that eliminates pleasure. Instead, it's a brain that can enjoy something fully without being controlled by it. A brain that works for you instead of against you. So of course, go enjoy the finals. Go enjoy the World Cup, which is still going on. Wear the jersey, paint your face, celebrate the win. Feel the energy that comes from being part of a tribe. Feel that connection. Feel the shared experience. But please make sure you're participating in it rather than becoming consumed by it. That's the difference. That's the distinction. Because when sports create community, your brain benefits. When identity becomes fused with the outcome, the same system that brings people together can quietly begin pulling people apart. So if you'd like help understanding how your own brain patterns are at play, please go over to drtrishleigh.com. You can scheduleize your personalized consultation. You can scheduleize your brain map so you and I can look at your brain together. And always remember, control your brain or it will in fact control you. I'll see you next time.